From the University of Alaska Anchorage, this is Seawolf Voices, a podcast about the pathways to and from education. I'm your host, Matt Jardin. With the new academic year underway, education alumna and high school English teacher Temperance Tinker Kays is right where she wants to be. This year, however, has big shoes to fill. In April 2022, toward the end of her 14th year at West Anchorage High School, Temperance was surprised with the title of this year's Milken Educator Award, considered to be the Oscar of teaching. In this episode, Temperance shares some of her favorite lessons to teach her students, how both teaching and learning have changed since the pandemic, and how communities can better support their schools and teachers. Temperance, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
I'm going to be very selfish with my first question. So, we were already talking, and you know that I have a new kid. So he hasn't started school yet. It's going to be a while. But as a new parent, we're talking at the start of the semester. So I have to ask, what are some tips that you have for parents and students that are just starting school?
I think come to West High is my first tip. And in part, that's because I know most about high school.
Mm-hmm.
That's really where I've spent my time. So I can't give you much advice about those early years, except a lot of my friends are sending their kids to school, and it's a big moment. Getting good sleep is really great.
Mm-hmm.
For on the student end, treating your teachers like people. It's a really wonderful thing when a student is able to address you, and that goes both ways.
Mm-hmm.
Finding a teacher that treats students like people and very humane and understands life happens and is approachable and all of that. So,
how long have you taught at West?
This is my 14th year at West. I think, and my 16th year teaching. So most of my teaching has been at West.
I actually graduated from West.
Alumna.
But here's the thing. I graduated from West in 2005, but I only spent my senior year there in West.
Okay.
So I'm from Juneau, and my parents had the great idea to move during my senior year.
Oh.
So I know.
Did you like it? Was it?
I did like it. I'm sure I would have liked it more if it hadn't been my senior year, So, but I'm totally over it. It's fine. It's fine. I'm totally over it.
It's not affecting me at all.
It's not affecting. In my 30s, it's not something I hold on to at all. So
thanks, parents.
Exactly. So what inspired you to choose education as a major and career?
Well, I tried to do everything besides becoming an educator.
Mm-hmm.
So I built log cabins, and I was studying anthropology and did not plan on becoming a teacher. And then eventually found my way to it because I realized that in my spare time, I was like a coach. I was coaching ice skating and teaching aerobics to old people and tutoring. And I was in love with reading books and listening to books and listening to podcasts, and just slowly kind of realized that if I wanted to continue my love of English and then my love of helping others, that teaching English was probably the way to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't know that I wanted to do that. In fact, my mom is a teacher, and she became a teacher. She went back to school. She actually came to UAA when I was 8. And I saw her go make those hard choices of going back to school in your 40s. And she always was telling me, all these younger kids, it's easy. College is easier for them. You have to go to school and finish your degree, So we saw my mom do that, and I was like, oh, I'm not going to become a teacher. That's not for me. So I really tried to fight it, but it turns out I actually really like it. So
that's awesome. I feel like the more that you try to not follow your parents' footsteps, the more
it's a universal irony of life.
Yeah.
And especially as I'm become a parent now, and I am surprised at the ways in which I am my mom.
Yeah. How old are your kids now?
I have a 3.5-year-old.
Okay.
And she's really great. And then a 14-month-old.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a lot. So plenty of time to get them down the path of wanting to be teachers as well, right?
I'm sure they'll fight anything that we tell them to do. Yeah.
Right.
At this point, though, my daughter loves her school, and she really loves her teacher, Miss Alexis, and just talks about her all the time. So it's kind of a cool thing that she respects teachers already, and I'm like, yeah, that's what mommy does too.
Right.
And actually her dad's a teacher too. So my husband teaches at Central Middle School.
So it's
a family thing.
All over the family.
Yeah.
It's perfect.
Yeah.
What led you to attend UAA?
I, as someone who grew up in Soldotna, Alaska, 99669, shout out to the zip code, I always thought, and maybe you can relate to this in Juneau, that people who lived in Anchorage weren't Alaskans. And I, as a teenager, always thought of Anchorage as like the Costco parking lot and a lot of traffic.
Mm-hmm.
And like while you got a Costco muffin at the end of that endurance, I really wanted out of Anchorage. And I always told myself I would never live here.
Mm-hmm.
And then after living all these different places, I came back to Alaska and was like, wow, Anchorage is really cool. Like the trails, the bike systems, the access to the mountains. I wanted to live here all of a sudden. And it was a big turnaround. I was kind of had to admit my flaws. And UAA offered a program for the MAT, which is the Master's of Arts in Teaching. And it was 1 year or 1.5 years. And I applied.
Are there any lessons or experiences from your time here at UAA that you still draw upon today?
I was thinking about this today. I had 2 really solid professors, and one of them was Paul Onktekuk. I mean, he's a legend. He told stories to teach, and the way he taught was like a connection to his traditional way of how he learned. And to see that modeled was really cool. And I don't know that I've ever had a teacher, an Alaska Native teacher, teach like that, you know, in a professional, like I'm getting credit for listening to your stories and being held accountable for understanding their importance. So that was really eye-opening for me. And also this kind of sense that like to bring your culture into teaching could be really helpful if we kind of encouraged more teachers to do that. It's a really big learning experience. And then I had a professor, Janet Steinhauser, who really saw her students as humans. And that made me be like, I want to also do that when I'm a teacher. I think as a teenager, I don't know. I didn't love all my teachers and would get frustrated, you know, as any teenager does. And now it's so funny being in their shoes or being in the place of the teacher and looking at my students and being like, oh, you just got frustrated by what I said. Well, and you were asking earlier about teaching seniors, and I really like that time. I think it can be a really amazing time in life, and it can be a time where you really need adults to say, I see you, you're a really good writer. You know, like you've told yourself you're not a good writer, but you are. And you can like do something with that, you know? So it's a time of like, I can have a bit of influence and they can hear that and hopefully take some inspiration from it. And it's also a time where as a country, we tell 18-year-old boys, you're checking a box that says you'll go to war and die for our country. So it's a really good time to start like checking in about like your values and like your Americanness and, you know, the systems that you were grown up with and how maybe, you know, whether or not you are living in alignment with them or agree with them or, you know, want to protest. So it's really cool to interact with students at that kind of age where, yes, their prefrontal cortex is not fully formed. They are getting upset because they think they have a pimple and everybody can see it. But on the other hand, they're also making these steps where their accountability and consequences are of huge import. And so it's a really hard time to live through. And we've all been through it, and thank goodness, right? But I just look back on myself as a 17-year-old and like, oh, like
if only you knew.
What an idiot.
Just get it together past me.
Come on. Yeah.
Can you walk me through your trajectory, like after graduating UAA up to today?
Yeah, well, my partner at the time got into Harvard after I finished my MAT here. So I spent my first 2 years teaching in Boston and Cambridge. And that was really eye-opening. You know, I had lived in New Zealand and in Hawaii and in Montana and visited a lot of the country and the world. My sister was living in Europe and I had traveled. I felt like I was well-traveled. And then I lived in Boston and I had the most culture shock that I had ever had before. And part of it was just that there's a cultural value that you understand the importance of universities and like the names of good universities. Like I think in Alaska, the first question is like, oh, what do you do? Maybe. And like, whatever that means. But in Boston, the first question I got was, where did you go? And I was like, oh, I've traveled a lot. I really like, no, it wasn't that. It was like, what Ivy League did you attend? Was the assumption behind that. Or where did your parents go? And I was like, just having to like turn my neck and almost break it to be like, my parents didn't graduate college, or my mom did because she went back. But to this like learned assumption that education is really valuable and education opens doors and teachers are really valuable was not necessarily something that I grew up knowing or even like inheriting from my culture. So it was really eye-opening to teach there. And I really enjoyed it. It was awesome. But I also missed the mountains. And although it's been raining for the last 2 months, I was kind of over like the cold sideways rain that they called winter. And I was like just hungry for some like snow and
real winter
and like snowboarding and just getting back to like, some nature. And I think a lot of my friends who moved all around, kind of like, I spent like 10 years away and came back, had the same experience where there's also, you miss the people. There's like a sense of openness and adventure in many of the people, and a willingness to accept you as you are, or like not necessarily ask where your parents went to college as the first thing when they meet you. That was really just, I miss that, And sometimes I miss Boston. I miss people kind of assuming that I read the New Yorker and have ideas about it. That's a really nice feeling. Yeah, I missed Alaska. And so when I moved back to Anchorage, I was going to be here for 1 year. I took like an emergency opening at West, and I was like, okay, cool. I'm going to like find my footing, be an Alaskan again, and then see what's next. So I think as adulting goes, and many people have told me this is their experience too, they came here for 1 year or maybe 2, and then it becomes 5, and then 7, and like I'm like, how did it get to 14? This is my 14th year at West. I did not plan that at all. But,
where did the time go?
But I'm also happy to be here. So
how has that global experience traveling, like how has that influenced your teaching, if at all?
I think that some of the biggest learning I've done in my life is through travel, and part of it is learning to listen and see things that are normal to other people that wouldn't be normal to me. And that also comes from an anthropology background and like wanting to know more about other people and their values and cultures. But my biggest like aha moment, I always teach students what a paradigm shift is. So I use this story from my childhood. When I was 17, I went on this like mission trip. And we're bringing medical supplies to Nepal. And, we land in Kathmandu, and we, it was the biggest city I'd ever been in. It was, just so eye-opening. There were cows stopping traffic. It was, a different culture. I was aware of that. But I saw a sign, and I'm pretty sure it was 1999 when I left Soldotna, Alaska. And when we arrived in Nepal, it was 2026. And I was like, what? I didn't time travel,
right?
It's not. And that was my like huge paradigm shift. It was this aha moment that I've always viewed myself as like, oh, I'm an Alaskan, and an American. But like I had to really realize that my perspective was also Western and based on the Christian calendar. That's where we start our year from, and where we're counting what year it is. And even like that we don't follow the lunar calendar, like all of even what like day of the week it was or what date of the year it was different if you're don't have a Western perspective. And so for me, that was like, I was 17 and having my little like, oh my goodness, how else am I ignorant? How else do I not know? What other things don't I even not know that I don't know? Yeah, I think that's what I've done with travel, is just discovered more things I don't know.
So you mentioned the paradigm shift. Is that your favorite lesson to teach, or what is your favorite lesson to teach?
Oh gosh. Well, I think I would always tell that story while teaching like Plato's Allegory of the Cave or something, like in very 10th grade. What's my favorite lesson? I think it's really awesome to be able to dig into literature, especially with my classes now. So we're going to start reading Roundhouse. It's by Louise Erdrich, and I'm kind of like fangirl of her. So I ended up writing my thesis when I was studying in New Zealand. I wrote on her and C.S. Lewis. So I'm like a nerd about her anyways. But so I get to teach this kind of coming of age story around an issue I care a lot about. She's writing about missing, murdered, and Indigenous women. And I'm also like kind of bringing that issue to students who also care about it. Through literature, you can kind of do that and access a personal experience and that perspective without, having to have it yourself. So I'm always enjoy probably the teaching we do around literature and digging through it and sifting through it.
Do you have a particular philosophy or approach to teaching?
I would say I've kind of worked with students enough to say that I'm not going to give up on them and they can't give up on themselves. And so when it comes time for them to they went out to lunch and don't want to come to fourth period, please remember that don't give up on yourself. Like, you need this class to graduate. Come back from lunch. Like, it's worth it to be here. And that even if they decide to skip my class, that, there's always tomorrow and I'm not going to give up on them or, hold them accountable to like the worst thing they've ever done, because I understand that life happens. So,
yeah. Is there any uniqueness to teaching here in Alaska that you've noticed?
Definitely. I think some of the funniest things are when I ask students to share the assumptions that other people have about Alaska, But I think one of the real hardships with seniors is this kind of sense that higher education has to be pursued outside of the state. And that's something that I think we're really working on, and I know UAA is probably working on, to say you can have a really amazing experience and have like pretty high degrees and do great things in the state of Alaska. So I've been really encouraging my students, like, look at Alaska Performance Scholarship, look at programs and see what's available. Because the assumption that I understand wanting to move out of your parents' house and having to launch yourself into living and like taking care of your own needs. That is a really important experience. Like, we all need to be able to do that. But on the other hand, I think that the belief that many of my Alaskan students have is that it's not a real launch if you don't leave Alaska. So I do love travel. So on the other hand, I'm like, yes, like, go see the world. But also you can live in Anchorage or go to UAS or UAF and have a really great education.
How have you seen education and students change since the pandemic began?
I just realized while I was like teasing some of my seniors, I was like, you guys, these aren't senior questions. You're acting like sophomores. And then I was like kind of a tease. And then I was like, oh, no, they're sophomores. They haven't had 4 years of high school. And part of that looks like a lot of fear around public speaking, presentations, interactions, anxiety in the hallways. It also takes the form of maybe a good thing to come of it is that we can all admit that mental health is health and not like something we like shove under a rug and don't talk about. So I've had students be more aware of their own need to be grounded or take time for themselves or do meditation or, get involved in a club where they talk to other people because they went to some dark places and felt really isolated. So I've seen some of the positive outcome. I mean, I could put a positive spin on it, but I think that, enduring something so difficult and where there's a lot of fear and loss and, people lost a lot of things, and you could trivialize it and say, oh, you just lost, being able to go to a homecoming dance. But like, this was a rite of passage that they had been looking forward to. And it also had some deeper meaning and they had to be sitting at home. And so I see a lot of that social, emotional stuff that's still kind of haunting a lot of my students. And then during online teaching, it was drastic how the inequality was completely exacerbated. The people who were struggling to pay rent and get their next meal, online school was not a priority, and it couldn't be a priority. And it just made things so much more unfair to people. And you could see the learning loss and the gaps in learning. How, if you were hanging out in your condo at Girdwood, zooming into my class, not to say you didn't have hardships, but your hardships were really different than I had a student who was working nights at the airport and showing up to my class on Zoom, and he would be 5 minutes late, and we talked about why. And I'm like, yeah, you can eat your dinner. It's 8:05. I'm okay with that. I'm glad you're here. You're still getting your education, and you're working nights, and you're supporting your family. So I think the inequality of access, of what a school provides and what a school family provides, is so much worse for kids who were already struggling socioeconomically.
So building off of that, how has your approach to teaching changed since the pandemic began?
One of the words that a colleague of mine was using early on was grace, and a lot of grace for understanding that this homework maybe didn't get done on time, And so I think maybe I've already had that, but one of the ways I've said it out loud to my students, that we all have shit, that it's all gonna be okay, and it's gonna get in the way of things sometimes. And so I say that out loud to them on day one. And I think the understanding is that you still try to show up when you can. I was already out sick one day. We've been teaching for 12 days, and my son got pink eye. So I'm getting him to the doctor, getting antibiotics. I'm already, have to have my family be first. And so, as a parent of young kids, I understand that on a deeper level now. And I think that it's important to say, hey, kids, if you have to babysit your younger siblings because your parents work 2 jobs and somebody at home is sick, I understand that. And I'm not going to think you're a bad person because you have put your family first. But I also don't want you to ghost me, and I want you to still show up when you can, So I think more of just being open about how difficult life is has changed my teaching a little bit.
Take me back to that day where you won the Milken Educator Award.
I think that the great irony of being an English teacher who hates public speaking is that I got given a microphone after being surprised and still didn't faint. I said words. But yes, so the assembly was billed as an anti-drug assembly, and I was sitting with my students, and little did I know that they had somebody kind of following me around, and then a bunch of cameras on me. So there are camera recordings of me talking crap about the assembly, I'm talking to the kid next to me, and then we learned that it was not an anti-drug assembly, it's to celebrate a teacher. So then the kid next to me, we're looking around the gym, and we're like, oh, where's Miss Kiddo? Oh, she's sitting over there. Oh, Mr. Miller, he's in the balcony, and he has a cane right now. He's going to have to walk all the way down. We're knew it was Berglund, So we went around and found the teachers that could be, because it's this slow build of a setup. Do they win $25? No. Do they win $2,500? No. They win $25,000. Wow. So as this slow build is happening, the student next to me goes, maybe it's you. And I was like, no way. Of course, yes, I do want $25,000. Who doesn't? And I had heard of the Milken before, the people, Val Ballarud, who had been awarded this. She's amazing. And I'm like, oh my gosh, well, she is that caliber. And Mark Elfstrom, the work he does with kids to get them into the outdoors, and oh my gosh, he's the heart for disadvantaged youth. I was like, oh yeah, well, I know Milken's a big deal, and I know it's not me. So yeah, when they called my name, I was completely stunned. And my principal had kept it a secret.
Mm-hmm.
And my husband, they had gotten from Central Middle School, and he was like in the corner where I couldn't see him.
Yeah.
And he came out. And so it was exhilarating.
Mm-hmm.
It was, that unbelievable moment. They call it the Oscars of teaching.
Mm-hmm.
While on the one hand, I would love to get another big check. On the other hand, I don't know if my heart could handle like a surprise like that again,
Mm-hmm.
because it's also the first feeling was, I don't deserve this. I think of all the other teachers I work with who not only work harder, but are better, are like, so much more dedicated, are they're staying later or changing kids' lives on this like epic level. And that year was a really hard year for me. I had a lot of loss in my life, and I was just like, I am barely here. I am barely able to physically get myself in the door, and they're giving me this award. So I just felt really undeserving. That whole complex of being like, I don't deserve this, I'm an imposter, that kind of thing is something you have to face when you get rewarded.
Mm-hmm.
And it's weird. It's like you should be happy, and instead
Mm-hmm.
you feel very undeserving. So I've talked to people about that a little bit, and especially my principal, he's like, no, we picked you on purpose. Like, you deserve this. They
Mm-hmm.
picked you on purpose, like you're deserving. And it doesn't mean that the other, staff I work with aren't also deserving. So
Mm-hmm.
that's been kind of a good change for me in my thinking. Yeah, it was wonderful to be recognized. It was also, so last year I was out on leave because I just had a baby.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't really get to know my seniors at the beginning of the year. And then my sister died, so I was out on bereavement leave. And so I really didn't get to know my seniors till I didn't even meet them till around November.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't really like able to be the teacher I like to be because I was just in so much grief.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, then there was, an old dog who died, and my stepmom. And then, as my daughter says, and our fish died too. And I like forget even that, yes, our fish died too. So I was just dealing with so much, of my own shit. Like I said to my students on their first day, that it was also kind of one of those out of body moments where you're like, is this really happening? Is this my life? Did I like wake up in someone else's shoes? Like what's going on here? So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think they do this surprise element on purpose. They really want to acknowledge that teaching is hard,
Mm-hmm.
and that, a lot of teachers should be getting these $25,000 checks, and also that they believe in you, So I feel like they flew me to LA, and I got to go to a conference with a bunch of other, like, it was just like a teacher nerd hangout where, it was really inspiring to hang out with teachers who weren't jaded, who were really excited about teaching, who, still think they're going to make a difference in their classroom. And
Mm-hmm.
I had some inspiration there. So, yeah.
So we know all the ways that our teachers and schools can impact our communities by creating more educated students. But what are some ways that our communities can better support our schools and teachers?
I think about this a lot. And I've actually listened to like assembly members talk about this, and what if you could do one thing? I think it was Margot Bellamy who said it. If we could do one thing that would have drastic consequences across the board in all of Anchorage, it would be to provide fully funded PreK, universal PreK for all students. And when I heard her say that, I am going to have a daughter who would be in, PreK next year. And so I could connect to it personally. But I thought so much about the learning gaps that I see as 12th graders. That what are the avoidable learning gaps that could be taken away if everybody had access to early education, to reading, to support, to, a steady meal every day from the age of 4. Because if you're not getting that at 4 and maybe 5, and then by the time you're 17 or 18 in my class, there's so many different things you've had to face.
It's compounding.
Yes, that build on each other, that if we could start, at age 4 at that pre-K level and provide that for all of our students, it would just help so much. It would be the rising tide that helps all ships. So I think to vote for people who would support universal pre-K, to vote for, funding, for forward funding, our education, to get into like a little bit of like the knowledge we get as a student allocation base, and to raise that, to understand that living in Alaska is difficult and to keep teachers here. I think the state of Alaska, when my mom went into teaching, offered a competitive retirement system that kept teachers, and good teachers, teaching and caring and wanting to teach and wanting to get to their 25th year. And now in my kind of tier of retirement, their good teachers will leave after 5 years, because why would you stay unless you really want to stay where it's cold and maybe rains all of July and August? Why would you do that? When there's other, Nevada right now is like I know a bunch of people are moving because they're matching their salary and providing a salary or a retirement with healthcare. So I think, obviously training good teachers and then keeping them is a huge problem. Right now there's a shortage in any kind of work, but our community could support that early childhood. Obviously, sure, if you weren't working 3 jobs, maybe you could be reading stories to your kid. Like we signed up for that Dolly Parton. Did you do this with your kid? It's like this free, they send you a book once a month, and it's like a book kind of at the age level for the first 5 years of your child's life.
And Dolly Parton
does it because she's like, wouldn't it be cool if every kid had a book every month that came in the mail with their name on it? And it is cool. My daughter loves it. And it's like, and it's free for everyone, That's
awesome.
So,
I'm going to do that right after we're done recording.
You have to. And so I feel like she's somebody who's not an educator, but understands, what is it to have access to reading, and what is it to have access at all. And she's doing that. So.
What advice do you have for anyone who is interested in pursuing education as like a major or career?
I was just telling a student about this because she was telling me she thinks she wants to be a teacher. I was like, that is so cool. We need more teachers who want to be teachers. I think that is my advice, to want to do it. Like if you like the light bulb, the experience going on above your head when you learn something or have an aha moment, and you like inspiring other people to have those, like go into teaching. And then I would say after that, maybe don't work harder than your students. If you're a high school teacher, I feel like I did that and got really burnt out for a few years. And if you're going to stay in the job, recognize that, you need to hold your students accountable to working just as hard as you are. Although sometimes it's hard work to get them there. Eventually they can do it. So
you already started answering my next question, is what advice do you have for anyone who is just starting out as a teacher?
Yeah, I think find mentors. Find mentors in your building. For me, I have a teacher I will plan with, and like she's just made my life better. Every time we collaborate on something, I feel less alone and more excited, and like, oh, what did you think about this speech or this reading or this idea? I've never done that activity before. And so I think that if you shut the door and work alone, it can be really isolating. So to get out of your little silo and find a co-conspirator, you can really make a big difference. And Anchorage School District has like a mentoring program where I've done it a lot, where you meet like once a month and you can like go on a walk or do something with a new teacher and just say like, what you're experiencing is normal. It's overwhelming. It's hard. And it's also like great. Look at the great work you're doing. Yeah. So find mentors, I think.
A last question I have for you. What is your favorite part of the job? If you had to pick just one.
I know. I've had 2 things happen today where just like those were moments in my day where I was like, I'm doing the right thing. And one was girl with anxiety, was like kind of just like downward spiraling and spinning and having a hard time. And I kind of talked with her alone, and then we decided the best thing for her was to come back into the class and get involved. And we're having a class discussion on dystopia and utopia. And when she was able to like take herself out of the downward anxiety spiral and sit in the class, and then started engaging in discussion and had such insightful things to say and share, it made me think that she's in the right place by being in my class, and that I'm in the right place by making sure that I can, like, while giving someone space, she had to go on a walk in the hallway, I could also draw them back in and get them out of their, anxiety spiral. So I think that, doesn't solve her anxiety at all, but it also is a real moment that maybe she can look back on and know that when she can engage with ideas, that she has a lot there, and we want to listen to them, and that can be really profound for somebody to realize about themselves. And the other was this boy who told me he was a bad writer, and I told him that he wasn't, and I hoped that he was like, what? And I think that can really be powerful. A lot of students are in the space where they've told a story about themselves. When people can like see people, it's awesome and powerful. So,
Temperance, it was so great to have you on the podcast. Thank you for coming by.
Thank you for having me.
Seawolf Voices is a production of the University of Alaska Anchorage Office of Advancement and Alumni Relations.